California. Hi, folks. Casey calling from West Virginia. Hey, Casey. Okay, nice. Wow, 82 people. This is a big program. It's $400 million. We got lots of questions. Okay. Well, since there is a lot to cover today and obviously a lot of interest, this call is being recorded. So if you jump in late or miss anything today, we'll be sure to share the recording of the call with everyone. And with that in mind, I think we're going to jump in just to make sure that we have plenty of time to get into our conversation. So with that in mind, my name's Ellie Bernstein. I work at the Wallace Center and I'm calling in from DC. And we're here today to talk about some strategies to maximize the impact of the Local Food Purchasing Assistance Cooperative Agreement Program, which is a lot of words. So today we're going to provide just a sort of really brief reminder of how this program works, and then we're going to hear about some developing strategies and inspiring models to draw from. We're really going to focus more on sort of strategy and approach here and won't be getting into too much detail about technical details of the program, but we have compiled a lot of resources to help make sure that everybody's on the same page and that you all understand the ins and outs of how this bad boy works. So don't fret if you have some technical questions. We'll share lots of resources later. So before we dive in, I just kind of wanted to set the stage in how we feel and how we're approaching our support for y'all in this program, which is that we're learning. This is a new program. Nobody's ever done it before. USDA hasn't done it before. We haven't been in this position before. So, it's an evolving process, and this opportunity presents like a huge potential, but also is going to be really complex and is going to look different in every state based on who the lead agency is, what the resources and assets and partnerships look like where you are. So with that said, with the idea that, we're all kind of on this exploration together, we want to ask and remember that there's a ton of expertise in this room, and there's a lot of great ideas and a lot of potential from the folks here on this call. So we're asking you as, participants and leaders in your own communities to speak up, share what you know, and offer your knowledge and strategies so that we can all support the collective. I think our goal here is just to really make sure that this program has a huge impact, and that's going to take all of us, really committing. So another sort of thing to just keep in mind about this opportunity is that it was designed to be flexible, but it comes with the constraints that any state or federal agency is up against. They have legal limitations in what they can do, and it also feels like they're operating with more demand and more, work to do, and also probably less staffing than maybe ever before. So that's just something to keep in mind as we're approaching this program. And the other thing that's important here is that it's up to our community, it's up to the local food system leaders to make the best of this fund, to work with your state agency, to come in a spirit of collaboration, to be patient, and really work with your state agencies, because they aren't necessarily going to automatically reach out to us. It's going to be on us to make this happen and really get these programs to look the way we want them to in our states. So with all of that sort of grounding and stage setting in mind, I just wanted to spend a few moments here running through the broad strokes of what this program looks like to make sure that everybody kind of remembers what we're working with here. So I just stole these images from a USDA PowerPoint that they presented, I think right when this program was announced last month. But just a reminder, the goals of this LFPA program are: 1, to provide an opportunity to strengthen the local and regional food system; 2, to support socially disadvantaged and local farmers and producers by expanding economic opportunities for them; and 3, to establish and strengthen partnerships between those growers, those producers, and underserved communities. So that's kind of the major plan here. So Susan, next slide. And the way that's going to work is that the USDA has allocated a specific amount of funding to each state based on the TFAP calculation, which takes into account poverty and unemployment in that state, for a 2-year funding program. So the state and tribal governments are the ones that are actually going to send in the application to the USDA. And it's a non-competitive cooperative agreement process, which means that it's not like your LFPP or your farm to school grant, but actually so you don't have to get it right on the first try necessarily. States are going to send, and tribal governments are going to send this to USDA, and there may be some back and forth between the agency and the government at the state level to make sure that the program is up to their standard. So then the state agency is going to be the one that's responsible for procuring this food and then also distributing it. But there's a lot of opportunity for sub-granting, which is kind of where the local food system folks come in. Another thing that's important to keep in mind is that the program emphasizes targeted purchases from socially disadvantaged farmers to expand existing local food networks. They really want this to be an economic opportunity for the growers. And the other piece, which I forgot to put on this slide, is that they want to work to reach underserved communities, maybe folks that aren't normally hit by the standard emergency feeding programs that exist now. Another thing that's really important and that USDA emphasized a lot here is that USDA procurement rules, the rules that USDA has to follow when they're buying food, don't apply here. But whatever rules your state agency, whichever state agency is the lead here, those rules will apply. So a lot of the decision making, a lot of the sort of enforcement is going to happen at the state level. Next slide. So a little status update. Applications are due April 5th, but USDA said they'll receive them on a rolling basis. So it may take till April 5th. Some states may be super straight A students and get these in early, but that's kind of the timeline that we're on. The RFA dropped, I think, at the beginning of December. So right now, a lot of agencies are getting their proposals together. They're maybe hosting listening sessions, and they're looking for partners both on the procurement and the distribution side. So if you haven't already, now is the time to figure out which agency is taking the lead in your state, because only one agency can apply from each state, and figure out their plan and if you may be able to influence or participate in that plan. So that's kind of the status for right now. In some places, it's like the State Department of Ag. In other places, it's the Environmental Services Agency or the Department of Education. So that would be number one step, if you haven't already, is figure out who's kind of driving the train in your state. And with that, I think that's kind of the high level overview. The next slide also we'll share this slide deck with y'all and also share links to this USDA page where they're kind of updating all their information, including this FAQ, which they've been adding to. And then we also have our own web page that we're putting all of our resources onto, which includes a webinar that we hosted in December with some staff from USDA that went a little bit more into the kind of nuts and bolts of how this program works. So those are some other resources that we'll share with y'all too after this call. And I think that's it on the program overview. And we're on time.
Right. Thank you, Ellie, for that super comprehensive and very rapid overview of the opportunity. That was awesome. Thank you so much. And I hope that was helpful just to get us all grounded in what this is and how it's going to work. And what we wanted to do, as Ellie said, is just try to kind of source from the group, what are some strategies that are underway right now? What are people doing and how are they activating now to take advantage of this opportunity to be really proactive and practical in their approaches to make sure that this program gets used most effectively. And so we wanted to hear from a couple people in the group on what's happening now. And so we've got, I know at least one volunteer that was willing to share. So Jessie Gruner, thank you so much, from Pinnacle Prevention in Arizona, has been super proactive in organizing in her state and connecting with the different state agencies that are applying. So we were going to hear from Jessie. Kate Fitzgerald, I was going to call on you to share a little bit on what you've heard from a couple states, if you could. We're also going to share a little bit about what Michigan State is doing. They're taking a really proactive approach. And then we wanted to open it up to the group to share some of the strategies that you're doing. And so for those of you who are coming into the call and are just like bewildered or don't have any idea where to start, I encourage you to just be listening for ideas from your colleagues in this conversation, and to also be thinking about the trends that or recommendations, like what are we hearing in terms of strategies that we could be recommending to our colleagues, to our peers, to state agencies, et cetera, as we're hearing what different folks across the country are doing. So what we're trying to do right now is just some like crowdsourcing and sense making of what's possible. And then we can take that insight and information into our own organizing efforts in our states. So Jesse, if you wouldn't mind kind of kicking us off with what y'all are up to, and then we'll do a little bit of that popcorning around the room.
Sure, thank you. I'm Jessie Gruner from Pinnacle Prevention. I'm really excited to speak today, but mostly just excited to hear from all the brilliant minds in this room and see what other states are coming up with. Pinnacle Prevention, we're a nonprofit. We're based in Chandler, Arizona, Phoenix area, but we serve statewide, and we are working to cultivate a just food system and opportunities for joyful movement. And we oversee our state's developed food bucks program, our senior farmers market nutrition program, our WIC farmers market nutrition program. We also help to convene the Arizona Food Systems Network, which is a network of all our local regional food coalitions and policy councils throughout the state, which also includes our food bank network and our farm to school network. So I share this in just wanting to recognize we serve in this kind of really unique role, and we coordinate with all of our state agencies throughout all the programs that we offer already. So it kind of put us in a really good position to start the communication, as well as the conversation we've been having with our food bank network and our farm to school network when the announcement came. So we were kind of really well positioned to start these conversations. And I think we were able to have the conversations and connections with our state agencies, but also at the same time hold center our farmers and our community members and kind of fill in the gaps. And we're hoping to do that. So the first thing we've also tapped into, and I think, many states might have this operating, is a SNAC, which is the State Nutrition Action Committee. I know some states have a really active one and some states don't. Essentially, for those of you who don't know, it's just a way for all of the agencies that are working in the variety of USDA programs to come together to coordinate. So we started there because our state agencies were already very active in having conversation in the SNAC. It was on, when the announcement happened, it was the first thing on the committee agenda in the SNAC meeting. So we've just positioned ourselves to also be in those conversations to try to have a really coordinated approach and decide who's going to kind of weigh through the pros and cons of which agency is going to be best positioned to be the lead applicant. We've learned that sometimes they just need help in how it's going to roll out. They don't necessarily have the direct line to local farmers and producers, especially socially disadvantaged producers that we're trying to reach. And so really just helping to weigh who's going to be the best positioned to be the lead applicant, and then also distribute some of the sub-granting that we know is going to happen as well. So that's kind of one thing that we did first, is we just held the space for our state agencies to have the conversations, help us think through which would be the best positioned and which things need to be considered for a state agency to apply. So that's the first thing that we started to do. And then we've also started to create an inventory of all the local food programs that are already procuring local food, because we're trying to create this list of multiple points of entry for procurement. So we see perhaps maybe a low point of entry would be, for example, we have a local co-op that already does a CS aid. So it's a CSA aid program where it's already does box distributions using local produce to families and community members in need. So being able to scale up that program that's already in existence would be a really low point of entry. But we're also working to be really conscious of, this is a significant amount of funding that our state hasn't seen for local procurement. So how can we make sure that we're spreading the funding so that we're not scaling up so quickly that growers will then just have to scale back down once the funding goes away. So that's something that we're trying to be conscious of. And that's why we're taking this inventory of where we can kind of spread the wealth. And so we can have that appropriate scale. So things like our Double Up Food Bucks program, our farmers market nutrition programs, any of the CSA or other type of local food system programs that are also already procuring and sourcing locally, and then also have some distribution channels in place. So that's kind of our second thing that we're starting to do, is inventory. And then as we've already mentioned, we're doing listening sessions in February. Our timeline is we're planning February is going to be our time for listening sessions with farmers, community members, and stakeholders, and sharing that with our state agency partners, and then helping to draft and put recommendations and a proposal together in March, so then application can happen in April. So that's kind of our timeline we're working on right now. We do also, I want to mention, we do have a farm to food bank program. It's called Friends of the Farm. If you're interested, I'll try to grab the link after I'm done and put it in the chat, but it's a really great program. I know there's lots of different models for that, but I think one thing that makes the one unique in Arizona is that we're already doing procurement at market value prices for farmers. So we're already paying farmers for sourcing to our food banks at market value. So they're not a reduced rate, which is going to be really nice to also tap into that program and help to scale that up. Right now, it's only for produce. So being able to possibly expand into other protein sources is going to just, again, help to spread that funding in a way that's not going to be detrimental once the program funding runs away. So I would say kind of just to wrap up, I think the things that we're doing is just tapping into our local and existing coalitions just to kind of help get that inventory together so we can get that wrapped up into included in the proposal. And then holding space for conversation, not just with our stakeholders and community members and farmers and growers, but also with our state agencies to kind of help them weed through who's going to do what. I know this is not unique to Arizona, but a lot of our state agencies are on a hiring freeze right now. And so being able to hire somebody to oversee the coordination of this program is just not going to be realistic. So trying to pull together resources and figure out how to outsource that is going to be really important to help our state agencies with that. And then sharing with the state agencies what factors they should consider. I know we're not getting into the nitty gritty, but just some of our smaller farms, just procuring and distributing, backing up, getting onto farm property to actually source the produce, and just helping them think through the logistics of can be really small scale, and a 53-foot truck is not going to make it on a small farm. So just helping them think through some of those like really practical logistics has been really actually fun conversation that we've been having. And then also just wanting to ensure that this doesn't fall into one entity. So we don't want the one state agency to have to be responsible for all this, knowing that everybody's already strapped, working remotely in the midst of still the pandemic. So figuring out how we can all come together and be partners and share this. And hopefully that will create some sustainable solutions down the road that will last, beyond the funding stream. So that's what we're doing, but also very excited to hear and learn from what others are doing and what we can take back to our group that's working together in Arizona. So thank you.
Jessie, thank you so much. So many nuggets of wisdom and great strategies at play there. So I was furiously taking notes and really appreciate you kind of recapping them too. For those of you that are trying really to write down all the notes, just know Annalena on our team is also taking notes right now, and we'll send those out to everybody. So thanks, Annalena, for that labor. Would love to hear for some other folks in the group. I think a bird told me that Nessa Richmond was on the call. And I wonder, Nessa, if you wouldn't mind from the Rhode Island Food Policy Council unmuting and just sharing a little bit about what y'all are up to and how you're organizing and advocating right now.
Sure, I can share a little bit. I don't know if Jack Sisson from Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management is also on the call, but I'd welcome him to unmute and add in as well, because we've really been working as a partner to our state lead agency, the Department of Environmental Management, which in Rhode Island houses the Division of Agriculture. And so we've been providing support to them in terms of just, we have a higher level of familiarity with this type of application process. So we've been trying to inform them about, what is necessary and what's, suggested for different sections of the application. And they've done a wonderful job, as they always do, of kind of gathering the voices together in the room. So they had just earlier this week a big call where they invited everyone to come, laid out the program, much like you guys have in this national venue, and then invited conversation from different stakeholders. So that probably had about 20 or 25 people on the call. Some of them represented food hubs. Some of them represented groups of refugee farmers who've been farming for a while. We also have a really big fishing industry, and this program, you can use it to procure seafood. So that's a really big part of what's going on here in Rhode Island as well. I think that a lot of people came to the table with their information about what they've been doing during COVID, specific programs that have popped up within communities that really, they see this program having an opportunity to leverage those pieces. So as one example, there's been a program that has been developed between the commercial fisheries industry and about 5 or 6 community-based organizations that primarily serve refugee populations and our indigenous population. And they have moved a lot of fish into those communities for whom it's a culturally appropriate food. So this program holds some opportunity to create sustainability around that program. And, so I would suggest that learning about those individual kind of state specific or even more local programs that have the opportunity to gain some footholds in terms of sustainability or program growth is a great place to look. One piece that we learned about that Ellie referred to earlier, I think, is a limitation that our state lead has around its the way that it does kind of contracting. So there's a lowest cost bidding rule that the state has to abide by. So they've been in a lot of conversations with their chief financial officer to understand exactly what that means in terms of this particular program opportunity. And what it might mean for them, I don't think there's a definitive answer yet, but what it might mean for them is that they have to find some type of sole source entity that can actually take the funding and then distribute it without that lowest cost bid kind of barrier. So I would suggest that anybody who's working with a state agency, or if you are a state agency and you haven't talked to your chief financial officer yet to understand the state regs around this in general, that would be a really good thing to do, because it's gonna, if there are restrictions around that, then it's gonna have implications for your overall program structure. So, things are still really fluid here in the way that's actually going to play out. But I do think that, there's a great start in terms of the state really having an open conversation. There are already voices at the table that represent our refugee farmers, our food hub that is placed in an underserved community, in addition to our central food bank and our kind of larger food hub. So lots of people bringing resources to the table. And I think that the asset mapping that Jesse just talked about is probably an important next step for us as well.
That's great. Thank you so much, Nessa. Just appreciate so much you and Jesse, just the level of proactivity and partnership that you're just leaning so hard into those partnerships and really being a resource to the state agencies. I think that's really key for support organizations that are on the call. And also, I know there's a lot of state agencies also on the call, and just really encouraging you to lean on those partnerships because the local food resources here are pretty deep. So I wonder, I see a couple of hands up. I'm curious, want to invite in some other voices of different strategies. Like, what are you doing right now to organize around this opportunity? And really trying to keep that in the frame of sharing it so that other people can help like weave those ideas into what they're doing. So this is really about helping to resource other peers. So I see Amy Krigsman, you have your hand up. Do you want to unmute and share?
Yeah, hi. I actually have a question for the folks that have already shared, and anybody else really that has some input. But my question is, for those of you that are working with your state agencies, did you already have that existing relationship, or did you seek that out as because of this grant opportunity? And how did you go about doing that if you did?
Great question.
We already had our relationships with all of our state agencies through our Double Up Food Bucks program. And then we do a lot of work with our SNAP Ed programming in the state. And then we also have an ag workforce development program that we help to or work with Department of Ag and our extension office on. So I think and they already participate in our Arizona Food Systems Network. So I think we had an advantage that we had really good connections within all of our local state agencies. So we were able to kind of connect with them right away to set up a meeting of the minds to weigh out pros and cons of which agencies should apply. So that's how it was for us in Arizona.
And we also had strong partnerships developed with the State Department of Environmental Management and other state agencies. But I don't think that means that if you don't already have those existing relationships that you can't start, because this is a specific opportunity where the application looks a lot like applications that you may be familiar with from the other LAMP programs, looks a lot like them, as you guys know. And the state may not have looked at those applications before. So you may have expertise that they don't, and coming to the table as a new partner, saying I have expertise with this type of application might be, there might be an open door to that.
It's a great point. Thank you. One thing I wanted to share quickly, I think I can attach a document in the chat box, I'll throw it in there in a moment, is that Michigan State has sent out like a letter of intent inviting organizations to get in touch with them, which I think is a really interesting approach. Yeah, I just put that through. So if anyone in the state of Michigan hasn't seen this yet, there you go. And also for the other state agencies, this is a great way to go to solicit different partners who do have the expertise to work with you on this project. Kate Fitzgerald, I just want to quickly ask you if you have any other things that you've heard. I know you've been kind of scanning the country for different resources and the way that people are going about this. Do you have any other insights you want to quickly add before we shift into recommendations?
Not much. To tell you the truth, I have just been trying to identify which agency it will be in each state. So that when we get questions, we can point people in the right direction. And the truth is I've not been very successful because many states are still in the consideration stage and so haven't yet decided. But if you do find out, and for the state agencies on the call who have decided, Pennsylvania, for example, we know it's going to be the Department of Agriculture, but no one's allowed to hit Karen up for questions until next week because she's under a deadline now. But I would love to be able to get that information so that we can share it more broadly. Okay, look, we're hearing something from Washington. Okay, slightly different. So the state agencies that are involved, for example, just to the point, using the example that Susan just gave, in Michigan, it is not the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Human Services, it's the Department of Education who's going to take the lead on this. So it's not, I think we should understand that it's not necessarily going to be a function of the Agriculture Department. Another point that Nessa made is some states are constrained by legal limitations on what they can do. There's been some question in states with biennial budgets, for example, about whether a state agency can actually accept and spend funds that are supplementary to whatever budget was passed by that particular agency. The point being, there are some technical logistics to be worked out, and understanding and supporting your state agencies and helping problem solve there would be very useful. So anybody who has information about which agency will take the lead in their state, please do be in touch with me. The other point that I would just make is that this really is a different function that is being asked of states than they have ever been provided the opportunity to do before by the Ag Marketing Service. This is not only a nutrition assistance program, but it is also being conceived as an economic development program. So from the USDA's point of view, the hope is that these funds can start to develop market relationships that will carry forward into the future. So it's not based on low price, which is also a point that Nessa made, and which differentiates it very importantly from the more traditional TFAP type program. That is not at all to cast aspersions on TFAP, but simply to understand that's what is being asked of states is something new, different, and for which not all of them have in place the systems to accommodate this. So the point that Ellie made at the beginning, I think, is very important to bear in mind. This is new. States are in the same crunch that many are understaffed, overburdened. The more patient and helpful that we can be and provide support services and work to consensus conclusions, we're all more likely to be successful in the end. The other final piece, I think that all states are going to be looking to lean heavily on the substantial food bank network, which I think we are all very grateful exists. One other point is asterisk on this program is that AMS is also very explicitly asking that organizations and entities that are not necessarily part of those food bank networks be included, because there is a super effort to make sure that regions that are often left out or were not served by the Farmers to Families Food Box Program are included here. So there's an emphasis on looking for non-traditional types of recipient and distribution agencies. So something to think about there are partnerships, for example, with federally qualified health clinics, schools, Head Start, senior centers, rec centers, boys and girls clubs. Just remember that you can throw in this particular instance the net very, very broadly in terms of distribution agencies. And that's it, Susan.
Thank you so much, Kate. You're always such a wealth of resource. Also want to point out in that last point that you just made that we did get clarity that food could be channeled to schools and childcare centers, senior centers, et cetera, for food service. It doesn't just have to be product directly going to households. So that's also something to keep in mind as you're creatively putting together programs. I know we were going to move into recommendations, but I do see a hand up. Laura, do you want to jump in real quickly? And then we'll shift to the next part of our conversation.
Yeah, thanks. I'm wondering if there's anybody here representing tribal governments. And I've got the question, if a state has a tribal entity, can a tribal entity apply separately from a state entity?
Yes. Yeah. The answer to that question, the second part, is that absolutely. As long as it's a federally recognized tribe, they can apply separately. And it is a separate bucket of money. It's within the 400 million, but it's not the same as the allocation for each state, is my understanding. So, and as far as folks from tribal governments on the call, I'm not sure, but maybe they can reach out directly to you in the chat. Thomas, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, following up on that thread, is there any insight into how applications from the tribes will be evaluated? Like, is it based on need within the tribe? Is it a competitive process? I guess it hasn't been clear in any of the materials I've read so far.
I'm on the same page with you. I'm not sure. I'm curious if maybe Wes or Kate or anybody else with kind of a policy angle has seen more information on that, on the allocation. I'm not sure. It's a great question to send to AMS, and I will say they've been pretty responsive on those questions. So, I mean, what we can do, Annalena, make sure and star that one as a question, and other things that we want to capture and send to AMS and get them to include in the FAQs. We can follow up with a message to them following this call.
I also popped the email address that USDA has asked people to send those kinds of questions to. So we'll definitely send them a batch after this call, but yeah, they've been trying to keep up with that inbox. It's just lfpa@usda.gov.
All right, I think with that, Elizabeth, I'm going to shift over to you to kind of sum up some of the recommendations that we've already heard and what we've been gleaning, and solicit a little bit more from the group.
All right, thanks, Susan. And Karen, I want to acknowledge we see your question. We'll see if we can get through this, and if there's time for more questions at the end, we will make time for that. So hey y'all, my name's Elizabeth Outwell. I'm the project manager at the Wallace Center, coming to you live from Durham, North Carolina. So I'm going to run through some recommendations with the big caveat to keep in mind that We are as new as this as y'all are. So this is just what we've been able to glean from talking to folks doing this organizing on the ground. I'm gonna run through this as quick as I can, but then I wanna flip the script and open it back up to y'all to hear what recommendations y'all are having about where you're finding inroads and what is working, or inversely, what roads you've tried that haven't worked. So to start us off, keep in mind, as we said a bunch of times, this program is brand new. This is uncharted territory. And that's true for the state agencies as well. State agencies are not as nimble as nonprofits or for-profits. Any government agency is naturally limited with legal limitations and what they can do. So as Kate mentioned, a lot of these state agencies are also operating with more demand and less personnel than ever before right now. So in order for you to succeed, you're going to need to be proactive, but also accommodating to the state agencies and also probably to the partners that you're working with. Jesse talked about hosting listening sessions with state agencies to help them determine which agency is going to even apply, and also start to name some of those types of considerations that the applicant agency should be taking into account. Nessa talked about coming to the table ready to help and problem solve, saying, you know, these applications look a lot like the FMPP and LFPP programs that we all know how to rock real hard. So showing up, making yourself available, and making it easy for state agencies to work with you. Next up, getting your network together. Nessa and Jesse both talked about pulling together their networks to get input into this program. This program is going to require really strong relationships and also definitely systems thinking. It's going to take a broad range of organizations and partners that can address everything from supply chain development and resiliency to strategies for proactively building racial equity throughout the program design and ensuring that the program reaches the most vulnerable and hard to reach populations. So you're going to need a really deep bench of organizations that brings a diversity of these skills, perspectives, and assets. Once you have put together that dream team, we recommend identifying 1, maybe 2 points of contact to coordinate communication and strategy across your network of partners, to organize meetings, to set up these calls, and also to serve as a single point of contact for the state agency that's going to be applying for the cooperative agreement. You wouldn't want to get hit by 12 different emails about the same thing, and that's true for these state agencies partners. So having a single point of contact will really help to make things more effective. Maybe consider using something like a hub and spoke model where you have a central organizer coordinating across many partners. We heard Jesse speak about asset mapping. You really need to know what your assets are and what your value proposition is, because the goals of this program are intersectional. Strengthening the local and regional food system, supporting locally and socially disadvantaged producers, strengthening partnerships, distributing fresh and nutritious foods in rural and underserved communities. I bet almost everyone on this call has a lot of assets to achieve all of those goals, and you need to just really lay out a compelling argument about how and why your organization or your network is uniquely positioned to be able to meet the program's goals and requirements. So next, think about infrastructure and programs that are already in place and already having impact that you can use and build off of. There's a lot of examples of successful and impactful local food access programs and other programs that you can incorporate into your own work. We're going to hear about a few during this call. And almost all communities have some infrastructure that can be utilized. Maybe that's a community kitchen or a food hub or a farmer's market or a school feeding program. Jesse talked about creating an inventory of all the local food access programs across Arizona and being conscious of what scale is appropriate for these different programs. So doing that kind of thing, taking time to start out by mapping out an exploration of how your organization is going to implement the program and the resources that you have ready to leverage to source products, to reach socially disadvantaged producers, and to serve underserved communities. Another recommendation is to reach out to the major food banks and food pantries in the state. Keeping in mind, as Kate talked about, this is not the only eligible distribution channel at all. You're encouraged to look towards non-conventional distribution agencies. Kate mentioned schools, feeding programs, faith-based organizations, boys and girls clubs, nonprofits. But that said, food banks and food pantries usually have a large distribution network, and they may be the first place that some state agencies that are trying to figure out what to do are going to turn to. So just making that connection with your state or region's food banks or food pantries to get a sense of if and how they're going to be utilizing this program, work on building a relationship, and give them an understanding of how your organization or your network can be an instrumental asset in achieving the purposes of this program. Next, be thoughtful about time and how long it's going to take to do this work, right? Anyone who has ever managed any grant wishes that they had built in more time to do it. We all know food doesn't just appear in a supermarket or a food bank or a CSA box. We have to plan around whole growing seasons. And building a program of this size is going to take building new or building off of existing value chains. All of this takes a lot of time. So try and set yourself up for success by giving yourself, your producers, your partners more time to build up this program. Now, we've heard a lot about identifying what state agency is going to lead the cooperative agreement. You probably have a lot of questions right now about how pricing will be determined or food safety or regulatory requirements. And on and on. And I don't have that answer, and the United States Department of Agriculture doesn't have that answer, because this program cedes a remarkable amount of decision-making power to the state and tribal governments that are going to be applying to these cooperative agreements. So Kate mentioned that which state agency ends up applying for the fund is going to be different for different state and tribal governments. In some places might be the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Education, or something else entirely. Jesse talked about having a listening session to even help the state themselves come up with what agency is going to apply. So either if the agency has been determined, go ahead and start to build that relationship, and again, show up, see how you can help. And if not, you can consider working with the state to help bring in ideas, resources early on to help them make that determination. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Oh, okay, that might be all of it. I also just want to name a couple other recommendations that I heard Jesse, Nessa, Kate bring up, was holding space for conversations with your farmers and your growers in addition to the state agency, and doing that early on. Sharing with the state agency the factors that they should be considered, like the logistics of sourcing from a small farm. And Jesse talked about SNAC, State Nutrition Action Committee. That was a new term for me, as a resource to look for in administering a variety of USDA programs. So again, this is what we could distill from like the first couple furious months of trying to get our own heads around this and what we were hearing on the ground. But now I'd love to invite y'all to unmute or raise your hand, and we'll ask you to unmute if you feel like sharing with the group what's working for you, how are you finding success, and also if you prefer to start dropping your ideas in the chat.
While people are getting their thoughts together around any recommendations that they might add, I would also, in that first step where you're figuring out which state agency is going to be the lead here, also try and understand maybe like what their approach is, because some states might have come up with a plan that like is already pretty baked, and so it wouldn't be a great use of your time to like spend a ton of energy coming up with a whole plan and strategy and asset map if that state is like pretty much ready to go. So maybe also try and get a sense of what the status is where you are before, you know, putting a ton of energy into this idea.
Thanks, Ellie. Ben, thanks for being voluntold. Susan, you want to go ahead and unmute?
It's an honor to be voluntold by Susan. I just wanted to, I'm Ben Thomas. I work with the Community Alliance with Family Farmers in California. And just to cover the state agency, we, as far as we know, most recently, our Department of Social Services and Department of Agriculture are still determining who will be the lead applicant, or who will be the applicant. The model that we are encouraging right now, along with a set of recommendations that will support that model, is based on the first phase of the USD Farm to Families Food Box Program project, in which we had a network administrator that ran the funding and set the expectations and maintain the monitoring and asset mapping for a series of aggregators from the farm level to the nonprofit level to either those that were packing boxes and distributing, or worked with those that were packing boxes and distributing, including local food banks. And we're discussing this in the process of discussing this additionally with the California Food Banks, the Association of Food Banks. And I'll put a video that explains that project and shows the map. So I'll keep this really brief. But along with that and captured in that is essentially a statewide network to be able to purchase from farm level, purchasing from a few local small farms to mature full-scale business center food banks that are who serve socially disadvantaged farmers in California. And with that, we're trying to encourage and work through, and something I'm really interested in this conversation for, how to set price expectations that don't pressure small farms, and how to tier the distribution of that funding to be inclusive of all of those different levels of aggregators, to be able to, and additionally, how to tier the distribution channels to reach communities that are not reached by traditional, by conventional food access channels. And so that pretty much summarizes the way that we're approaching it now. And that would, could be potentially multiple network administrators throughout the state, but to be able to leverage that to reach a minimum of a percentage of BIPOC and socially disadvantaged farmers to maximize the support of farmers in the food system throughout the project.
Awesome, thank you, Ben. So hearing an echoing of asset mapping, utilizing and developing statewide networks, and then having some of those hard conversations around things like price, expectations, distribution early on, since ultimately those type of details are going to determine how this program gets rolled out state by state. So thanks, Ben. Christine, thanks for joining. You want to unmute and share?
Sure. Hey everyone, I am Christine Kwan. I'm in Detroit at Eastern Market, and we were an awardee of the USDA Farms to Families program back in May of 2020. And we are going to leverage a lot of that strategy that we used for that program. And I think the thing that really made that program great for the city of Detroit, where we were able to partner with community nonprofits as our distribution points, and so away from our traditional food bank network. The food banks were already being slammed at that time, and we felt that this took a lot of pressure off of the food banks of trying to access or trying to serve all the folks that they were serving. So And these neighborhood nonprofits know their folks better than we could ever imagine that we could. So that system really worked out well. One thing that I'm excited to do to kind of add more onto this, at the time when we were doing Farmers to Families, a lot of our small farms were struggling to keep up with CSAs, and they were slammed at that time. And so we couldn't get a lot of participation from a lot of our smaller farmers because they took that as an opportunity to meet their local demand for produce at that time. So, but now that some of that's evened out a bit, I feel now this is a better opportunity to kind of fold in some of those smaller farms, urban farms that we didn't get a chance to really dive in and work with during Farmers to Family. So I think a mixture of kind of leaning on our existing partnerships with nonprofits in the city of Detroit, also reaching out to Detroit public school systems. We have a lot of great partnerships there that we're going to try to leverage as well. And a lot of schools in Detroit Public Schools have been reaching out to us wanting to get our produce box. So I feel like the need and the enthusiasm is there on that aspect. So yeah, that's kind of our plan right now, is to kind of do a deeper, more diverse dive on our farmer network and lean forward on our community nonprofits partnerships that we've utilized in the past.
Awesome, thank you, Christine. And I'm hearing some resonance in the chat with some of the key points you were putting out. Mita was talking about adopting the levers, the infrastructure, the models that you have in place that are successful, and encouraging looking at adapting ideas from other places for your local conditions. Also in the chat, seeing a suggestion, think about how this program might be a pilot for something that you can test, improve upon, and continue in the future. Anyone else that wants to share some recommendations about what's working in your state?
I want to re-highlight something that Jesse raised about identifying the potential barriers within the sort of regulatory environment at the state level, and being really proactive to try to find solutions for those. I think that, as we all know, the devil's in the details when it comes to supply chain logistics. And this group of people really knows the ins and outs of supply chains and the logistics of that. So I just really encourage you to not leave that off the table. I know there's a lot of relationship building and networking to be done, but also like lean into your food policy councils and other like policy advocacy expertise within your states to be able to like look at the code and find out what kinds of regulations are there for, lowest price bid, or are you going to have to do a sole source? Like really start looking into that. Because I think, many of us haven't ever worked at this level of state procurement, and we don't even really know what's there yet. I certainly don't know what it looks like in Louisiana. So really want to emphasize that point too.
Hi, everyone. My name is Roberto. I'm from Colorado. I'm working with our local partners and networks here. And I just have a question to all of you. If surrounding the definition of socially disadvantaged farmers and producers, has there been consensus on what that means and how the states are kind of looking at that term to be strategic about this opportunity?
Yeah, it's defined. Hi, Roberto. It's defined on the in the RFA. So I think that language has been put in already. Basically, any group that has been discriminated on based on gender, age, ethnic or racial origin, it's explicit in there.
The reason why I ask is that I think that may not be a sufficiently defined or a sufficient definition. And so I'm just wondering if there's like discussions around that as well, even if it is in the RFP, just to be more cognizant, specifically since this is subject to kind of each individual state. So I just, wanted to see if folks were having conversations about that.
That's a really important question, Roberto. And thank you, Kate, for trying to answer that. I don't know, Wes or anyone else with more of a policy hat on, if you have any other ideas to add.
I was just going to say exactly what you said. I'd be curious to know, Roberto, what isn't well defined about that? Like, is there specific, because this is not something that I have, there's definitely tensions around what is included in that definition, but I've never heard necessarily exactly the way you're bringing it up here.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that there could be much more nuance and context specific elements that, you know, are different between regions across the nation, especially when we think about some of the histories of, quote, socially disadvantaged producers and individuals, and what that could actually mean within this context. You know, and I can't speak for every group or every context. So I just want to be mindful of that place-based kind of definition as well, even if it is tied to more systemic issues and processes.
Right. So, and I think Jesse Gill made a great point in the chat here that, you know, as we've said, ultimately the states are making a lot of these determinations. There's a lot of agency within each state, which is allowing for these programs to actually have that more local context and give these programs these nuance if we show up to do that organizing. This is kind of like democracy in action. Democracy works when we organize at a local and state level. So hopefully, like through these efforts at these state levels, we can encourage that these states bring in these considerations around who is actually being served and benefiting from these programs. We have just a few more minutes, y'all, and I feel bad. I had actually teed up CFSA, Carolina Farm Stewardship Association from my home state of North Carolina, to talk about their incredible Farmshare program, which recently received state funding. We don't have time to get into the full program, but I did want to ask Kana or Nick if you have any overall ideas of best practices from the Farmshare program and that really successful model that you want to share with the group.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth. So yeah, I'm Kana Miller. I'm the local food distribution coordinator with Carolina Farm Stewardship Association. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, we sort of launched and created this program called Farmshare. And just for sort of a high level overview, the program works with a network of food hubs and farms and community-based organizations to distribute boxes of locally sourced produce and protein to households in need. And initially, the program was really structured around sort of COVID-19 pandemic response, emergency food assistance, and was boxes were going to unemployed restaurant and hospitality workers. But over the past about year and a half, it has transitioned and is now very sort of specifically focused on getting food to folks experiencing food insecurity. And this is a statewide program that we have. And I think just for some of those like key recommendations, since we are short on time, so we started this in May 2020. And I think some of the key things that we've learned from running this program is that building and maintaining strong partnerships and relationships have been like foundational to our success. These relationships have allowed us to give full agency to the food hub partners that we work with, and really sort of trusting the food hubs and leaning on them to, you know, build their farmer network, work with their farmers for sourcing, and then also look to the community-based organizations in their sort of larger community who have, you know, long experience doing food distribution work. So really just giving that agency over to the food hubs, and then prioritizing that farmers are receiving fair payment for their food products. That's been a priority for us from the onset of this program, paying retail price instead of wholesale price. And then centering racial equity by working with Black, Indigenous, and people of color led and or managed food hubs. And to date, almost half of the food hubs in our network are led or managed by Black, Indigenous, people of color. And then just encouraging our entire network to work with farmers of color as well. And then I think finally a big key to our success has been able to have one organization act as the convener of this network of food hubs, farms, and community-based organizations, and that's been CFSA. And that sort of position as the convener has also allowed us to essentially act like a funder, to go after larger sources of funding and then funnel them directly, allocate them directly to the food hubs and the farms.
Connor, thank you so much. I think you just did an incredible job summing up like an immense amount of effort and program into a very short amount of time. But thank you for those recommendations as well. It's an incredible model and one that I really encourage y'all to check out if you aren't familiar with it.
Thank you.
So we are at time now. I know there was a couple other questions that we didn't get to, and I want to remind y'all, we're taking notes. This call is recorded, so if you need to jump off or feared you missed anything of the many great ideas that were shared here, we will share this back up.
Yeah, and I just saw an important note in the chat here from Karen that is, you know, we're all well aware that USDA has been rolling out a ton of programs and resources, and I guess there's an important TFAP deadline on February 4th. So there may be some state agencies that are like, please don't talk to me until this other application is in. And sort of similarly, we know that there's this other big school food opportunity that's going to be coming out at some point, and there isn't a ton of information there, but you know, these are all kind of stacking up, so maybe be thoughtful about the timing too, and maybe understand that there's a lot of work going on for other programs as well that are, you know, maybe once that TFAP thing goes in, folks will have a little more capacity. So we obviously are working really hard to break this into digestible pieces for y'all at the same time that we're learning and trying to understand what different folks are trying and learning in their own states. So again, this call has been recorded. We'll share that out. We'll share the notes. We'll share links to resources, both from us and from USDA and from our partners. We're also planning on collaborating with our friends at NSAC for another conversation that's more about sort of models and things that are starting to really look promising, probably next month. And in the meantime, if you have a specific question, if you had a great breakthrough, if you came up with an amazing idea and really want to share it, please let us know. You know, we're continuing to figure out ways to provide services to everybody in the network around this really exciting opportunity, and are all ears for how we can be most supportive of you, because this is just like a big deal, and we really want to make sure that it is as transformative as it can be. So with that in mind, thank you all. Many thanks to the folks that spoke up and shared what they're doing and learning. There's a lot of stuff in the chat that we'll try and digest and put into the notes as well, because there's some things that we didn't catch. And good luck, fight the good fight. Don't forget your partners, and we'll be sure to be in touch about next steps. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, y'all.